She dropped to her knees the moment she saw them. The little girl held a bear, the boy cradled in a nanny's arms. "My babies," Rachel whispered, her voice breaking like glass in the rain. Gabriel stood silently beside her, eyes filled with a grief he thought he'd buried. "They don't just need a home," he said quietly. "They need their mother." Rachel's hands trembled midair. "I thought I lost them forever," she choked, afraid they might vanish again. 2 years ago, she left them beneath a tree, believing she was saving them. But the man who found them had once lost everything. What happened next will break your heart, and rebuild it. Stay with us, because this isn't just a story about survival. It's about redemption. And the moment a mother came home, Gabriel Hartman hadn't slept in 3 nights. Not since the dream returned. Shattered glass, a child's scream, the screech of tires, and the last thing he ever saw in his rearview mirror, his daughter's tiny hand reaching for a red balloon. That dream always ended the same way: silence. And Gabriel would wake in a cold sweat, gasping for a breath that never seemed to come. Tonight, the rain was relentless, lashing against the windshield like it held a grudge. Gabriel's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as he drove down a narrow forest road, the same one where everything in his life had ended 2 years ago. "Anywhere but here," he muttered when his assistant called and asked where he was going. Then he hung up without waiting for a reply. He didn't know why he was driving. Maybe to escape. Maybe to remember. Maybe both. The road was nearly invisible through the fog and rain. The trees stood like mourners on either side, bending under the weight of the storm. His headlights flickered, and that's when he saw her. A figure in the dark, small, unsteady, moving between trees like a shadow. Her blonde hair was plastered to her face by the rain, and she carried something in both arms, bundles wrapped in cloth, cradled tightly against her chest. Gabriel slowed the car. The woman didn't see him. She moved with desperation, but not panic, toward an ancient oak by the roadside. There she knelt and gently placed the bundles at the base of the tree. He could hear her voice through the storm as she kissed each one softly. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "Please survive." She stood and then ran. Gabriel threw the car into park and jumped out, stumbling into the storm. "Wait," he shouted, but the woman didn't stop. She disappeared into the trees, swallowed by mist and rain, leaving no trace. The only sound left was the wind and the soft cries of something small. Gabriel turned back toward the tree, heart pounding. The 2 bundles lay exactly where she had left them. He knelt, peeling back the damp fabric with trembling hands, and his breath caught. 2 infants, a boy and a girl, barely a few weeks old. Their skin was pale from the cold, lips trembling. One whimpered. The other didn't move. He swallowed hard, something hot and unfamiliar building in his throat. Carefully, he scooped them both into his arms, pressing their tiny bodies to his chest. His coat was soaked, but it didn't matter. "You're okay," he whispered, though he didn't know who he was trying to convince. Back at his SUV, he turned the heat to full blast, wrapped them in his coat, and drove faster than he had in years. Toward the city, toward something that felt like a purpose. He didn't know their names. He didn't know why they had been abandoned. All he knew was that they were alive, and for the first time in 2 years, so was he. When he arrived at his mansion, once grand, now quiet as a mausoleum, he carried them in with steady hands. He passed rooms filled with silence and memories until he reached the guest room. The nursery was still sealed shut, a shrine to what he'd lost. Instead, he laid out towels, dried their tiny limbs, and wrapped them in baby blankets he hadn't touched in years. They were still breathing. So was he. As the storm faded outside, Gabriel Hartman sat in the dim light of a room he hadn't entered in forever, rocking 2 fragile lives he didn't ask for, but somehow already couldn't let go of. And in the softest whisper, he gave them names. "Lila, Noah, you're safe now." And for the first time in 2 years, his hands stopped shaking. Gabriel Hartman couldn't forget her. The woman in the rain, the way she clutched the infants, the way she kissed them goodbye like it was the only act of love she had left, the way she disappeared into the storm, not out of fear, but sacrifice. It haunted him. He watched over Lila and Noah as they slowly regained strength, feeding them from bottles with shaking hands, sitting by their crib each night as they breathed in tiny, rhythmic gasps. But even as their color returned, and their cries grew louder and healthier, one question remained unanswered. Who had left them, and why? Gabriel needed to know. Within days, he called in a favor. A former military contact turned investigator. Sharp, discreet, efficient. Gabriel gave him what little information he had: the location, the time, a vague physical description. The investigator scoured traffic cams, reviewed local shelter intake logs, and ran facial recognition software. After 4 days, he had a name: Rachel Monroe, 26 years old, no criminal record. Registered under a false name at a battered women's shelter on the edge of the city. Gabriel didn't hesitate. He drove there alone. The shelter was a crumbling old building tucked between warehouses, its gate rusted, its windows barred. He stepped through without a word, ignoring the wary glances from staff. One of the counselors paused when he asked for Rachel. After a beat, she gestured silently toward the back garden. Gabriel stepped outside, and there she was. Rachel sat alone on a weathered bench, wrapped in a gray blanket, her shoulders hunched as if bearing a weight she no longer had the strength to carry. In her arms, she rocked a faded pink cloth doll, one eye missing, the seams unraveling. He almost didn't recognize her. Her face was pale, hollow. Her eyes, once wide with fear in the rain, now stared into nothing, glassy and vacant. But when the gravel crunched under his steps, she looked up. Their eyes met. Recognition flickered, and panic. She clutched the doll tighter and stood abruptly, as if preparing to run again. Gabriel didn't stop. He walked forward slowly, his voice low. "How could you leave them?" he asked, jaw tight. "In the cold, in the rain. What kind of mother—" "I didn't want to," Rachel interrupted, her voice cracking mid-sentence. She sank back onto the bench as her knees buckled. "I had no choice." Gabriel froze. Something about the way she said it, raw, broken, made his anger falter. Rachel wiped her nose with the edge of the blanket, then looked up at him. Her words spilled out fast like a dam had finally burst. "I was with him for 3 years," she began. "At first he was gentle. Then the drugs started. Then the shouting. Then the bruises." Her voice trembled. "I tried to leave. So many times. But he always found me, tracked me, took my phone. Smashed it once because I looked at a police station too long." She exhaled sharply, her hands trembling around the doll. "When I got pregnant, I thought maybe it would change him. But it got worse. He said they weren't his, that they were weak, that if I ever ran again, he'd make sure none of us left alive." Gabriel said nothing. He sat beside her, still cautious. Rachel didn't look at him. Her gaze drifted to the doll. "I stayed up all night," she whispered. "I packed the warmest blankets I had, kissed their foreheads. I told them Mommy loved them more than anything, and I left them beneath a tree, because I thought someone kind might find them, someone better than me." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I came back an hour later. I couldn't stand it. I searched for them. I screamed their names even though they didn't have names yet." She clutched the doll like it was breathing, but they were gone. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air was thick with grief, the kind that didn't make noise but pressed into your chest like stone. Gabriel finally asked, "Why didn't you tell anyone? Report it?" Rachel looked at him, eyes wide and glistening. "I was afraid that they'd be taken away forever, that no one would believe me, that someone worse might get them." She paused, then added in a whisper, "I just wanted them to live." And in that moment, everything shifted. Gabriel had imagined a careless mother, reckless or cruel. But sitting beside him was someone entirely different, a mother who had given up her dignity, her sanity, her entire heart, in the hope her children might have a chance. He didn't tell her the truth. Not yet. He stood, nodded once, and left without another word. But that night, Gabriel made 2 calls, one to a private therapist, another to a small-town librarian in need of part-time help. Rachel never knew who arranged it, but from that moment on, Gabriel Hartman watched over her from a distance. Not because he had to, but because someone needed to believe in her before she could believe in herself. The first few weeks passed in a blur of silence. Rachel Monroe began her new job at a small, quiet public library tucked between a bakery and a florist. Her duties were simple: shelving books, preparing snacks for reading hour, helping children find picture books with dragons or dinosaurs. Tasks that required little conversation and gave her more in return than she could explain. The therapy sessions were private, anonymous. She never questioned who paid. She assumed it was the shelter or some hidden grant, and frankly, she was too tired to ask. What mattered was that someone believed she deserved healing, even when she didn't believe it herself. Each morning, she tied her blonde hair in a loose braid and pulled on the same gray cardigan. She kept her head down, avoided mirrors, and spoke in soft tones, as if afraid to disturb the quiet she was finally living in. But children were different. They didn't ask about bruises or pasts. They asked about storybooks, crayons, and snacks. They smiled at her without suspicion. And slowly, Rachel began to smile back. She started sketching again, tiny illustrations tucked into the margins of checkout receipts. A dancing squirrel here, a sleepy moon there. Her hands, once always clenched, now moved with quiet confidence. And though she didn't know it, Gabriel Hartman saw it all. He visited the library occasionally, always pretending to browse cookbooks or architecture books while stealing glances through the shelves. He watched her hand a little boy, a book about trains, and saw her laugh. Soft, cautious, but real. It stunned him every time. Rachel wasn't just surviving. She was beginning to live. Still, he never approached her. He kept his distance, honoring the space between them like a fragile thread that might snap if touched too soon. But everything changed on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Gabriel had stopped by the library again. The storm outside had sent most patrons home early. Rachel was stacking a row of returned picture books onto the shelf near the children's corner when she walked past him. He stood with his back to her, thumbing through an email on his phone. He hadn't noticed her, but she noticed his screen. A photo filled the display. Two toddlers sitting in a field of dandelions. The boy had a milk mustache, grinning crookedly at the camera. The girl had a yellow flower tucked behind her ear, eyes wide, clutching a teddy bear almost half her size. Rachel's heart stopped. The book in her hand fell to the carpet with a soft thud. "That's them," she breathed. "Isn't it?" Gabriel turned slowly. Their eyes locked. For the first time since the night under the tree, they stood face to face, and the air between them pulsed with unspeakable truth. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Rachel stared at the screen again, as if willing herself not to be wrong. Her breath hitched. "I know those eyes," she whispered. "I see them in my dreams." Gabriel looked down at his phone, then back at her, still silent. She took a step back, her voice trembling. "Please, just tell me they're okay, that they're alive." He swallowed, jaw clenched. "I'm not the one who found them," he said flatly, the lie coming out heavier than he expected. Rachel's face fell. Her lips parted, then closed. A long, broken exhale escaped as she turned away, her hand against the bookshelf to steady herself. "I thought maybe," she whispered. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Gabriel stood still as she walked away, slowly like a woman whose last thread of hope had just unraveled. That night, Gabriel couldn't sleep. He lay awake in his darkened bedroom, staring at the ceiling. The memory of Rachel's face burned into his thoughts. Her voice kept echoing. "That's them, isn't it?" The way her soul had recognized the twins before her mind even processed it. It undid him. There had been no doubt in her eyes, only love. A love that hadn't dulled with time, a love that never stopped calling itself mother. He looked into the nursery across the hall, now filled with the sounds of life. Lila's soft snore, Noah's foot kicking off a blanket. They were his now, in every way that mattered. He had raised them, kissed away their fevers, sang lullabies into quiet rooms. He had called them his, but they weren't only his. Their story didn't begin with him. And no matter how much comfort he had built around them, no matter how fiercely he protected them, the truth had returned, in a gray cardigan and shaking hands. The mother who had let them go never stopped waiting for the chance to hold them again. Gabriel didn't call. He didn't warn her. He simply showed up at the library the next afternoon. Rachel was restocking a cart of picture books when she looked up, and froze. He stood there in the main aisle, coat damp from the lingering drizzle outside, hands tucked loosely in his pockets, eyes unreadable. "Come with me," he said gently. Rachel blinked. Her fingers gripped the edge of the cart. "Where?" "My home." She stiffened, as if bracing for a blow. "Are you going to press charges?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "No," he replied. "I want to show you something." The drive was quiet. Rachel sat in the passenger seat, her fingers knotted tightly in her lap. The world outside the window blurred, raindrops trailing down glass like nervous tears. She couldn't tell if it was hope or dread twisting her stomach. Maybe both. Maybe that's what guilt felt like when it carried love inside it. The iron gates of Gabriel's estate creaked open, revealing a home that looked nothing like she expected. She thought it would be cold, austere, a fortress of wealth and silence. But instead, the windows glowed golden in the afternoon light. Wind chimes danced in the soft breeze. The garden was alive. Rachel stepped out hesitantly, her shoes crunching softly against the stone path. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon and something sweeter, childhood. Laughter echoed faintly from down the hall. There were drawings taped on the walls, stick figures with stars and hearts, messy attempts at writing names in crayon. She followed Gabriel through the corridor. He paused outside a white wooden door, took a breath, then opened it. Rachel's breath caught. The nursery was painted in a soft, buttery yellow. Toys were scattered across a plush rug. A mobile spun lazily above a crib. And in the middle of the room, two children. A little girl with honey brown curls, holding a stuffed bear almost her size, and a boy, quieter, curled in the arms of a nanny, sipping the last drops of milk from a bottle. Rachel's knees gave out. She dropped to the floor, her palm pressed against her chest as a sob escaped her lips. "My babies," she whispered, voice cracking like a dam giving way. Lila turned at the sound, curious, blinking slowly. Noah looked too, eyes wide and gentle. But Rachel didn't move forward. She just knelt there, afraid that if she got closer, they might vanish again. "I thought I lost them forever," she said through tears. Gabriel knelt beside her, his voice low. "They've been safe, loved, protected, but I've always known something was missing." Rachel looked at him, barely breathing. "They don't just need a home," he said. "They need their mother." A silence hung between them, full, trembling, sacred. Rachel reached out, unsure, her fingers hovering midair. Lila waddled over, plopping down clumsily in front of her. She looked up, blinking. "Hi," she said simply, holding out her bear. Rachel let out a broken laugh and took it, pressing it to her heart. Noah toddled closer too, curious but calm, hiding slightly behind the nanny's leg. When Rachel held out a hand, he inched forward, then placed his tiny fingers into hers. That was it. The floodgates broke. Rachel wrapped her arms around them both, rocking gently as tears soaked into their hair. Gabriel stood back, arms crossed loosely, his throat tight with emotion. This was what healing looked like. Not perfect, not instant, but whole. Later that evening, the four of them sat at a small table in the sunroom, warm soup steaming in bowls, crayons scattered between spoons and napkins. The twins were messy and loud. Rachel didn't flinch at the chaos. She smiled through it. And Gabriel. He watched them all, Rachel reading the same line of a picture book for the fifth time because Lila kept interrupting with questions. Noah climbing onto his lap mid-sentence. And he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. He wasn't a replacement. He wasn't rescuing anyone. He was part of something real. And as the sun dipped below the hills, casting gold through the windows, Gabriel looked across the table and whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "We're home." 1 year later, the mansion on the hill no longer echoed with silence. Instead, it sang, with the sound of laughter tumbling down hallways, the thud of small feet on carpeted stairs, the clang of pots in the kitchen as someone tried to pour too much syrup over pancakes. The estate that once stood like a monument to grief had transformed. It was no longer Gabriel Hartman's fortress of solitude. It was a home. Every room bore witness to that transformation. The walls, once bare and polished, were now lined with crayon drawings, stick figures of Mommy, Daddy, Lila, and Noah. and framed photos of real moments. Lila asleep in Gabriel's lap, Rachel reading in the garden, Noah stuffing grapes into both cheeks at once. In the sunroom where light pooled like honey across the tile floor, Rachel sat each morning with a notebook in her lap and a warm cup of tea by her side. She would sketch quietly while the twins played on the rug, their giggles like background music. And over time, those sketches became a story about two tiny stars lost in the night sky, found by a lonely man who had forgotten how to hope. Together they searched for the light that gave them life, and when they were finally reunited, the sky began to shine again. Rachel titled it, When Light Found Us. It was published by a small press, intended for libraries and families who believed in second chances. The reviews were modest but heartfelt. One librarian called it the kind of book that reads like a hug. A local school invited her to speak. She declined the first invitation, nervous, but she accepted the second, because Rachel Monroe was no longer afraid of her voice. On a gentle spring afternoon, Gabriel stood beneath the pear tree in the garden, arranging lanterns with Derek Saunders, his longtime friend, and now the unofficial uncle of the twins. "There are three now?" Derek asked, tying a string of soft white lights between the branches. Gabriel nodded, adjusting a paper crown on a nearby table. 3 years, and somehow, everything changed, without warning. The party was small, just friends and neighbors. A cake shaped like a castle sat on the table, surrounded by star-shaped cookies and juice boxes. Lila and Noah wore matching crowns made of glitter and gold foil. Their faces were smudged with frosting and joy. Rachel appeared at the top of the garden steps, wearing a flowing cream dress, her hair braided loosely down her back. She carried two gift-wrapped books and a camera. Gabriel watched her for a moment, how her smile reached her eyes now, how her steps were no longer timid. She met his gaze, then glanced at the twins spinning in the grass, laughing in tangled circles. "They look so happy," she whispered as she reached him. Gabriel nodded, smiling. "They are." And just then, as if summoned by memory, a soft spring rain began to fall. Not heavy, not cold, just a mist, a whisper from the sky. Some guests dashed for umbrellas, laughing. Others stayed where they stood, arms outstretched, faces turned upward in delight. But Rachel? She stepped forward into the yard, arms half raised, the hem of her dress already damp. Lila squealed and ran to her, Noah close behind. They collided into her legs, wrapping around her knees. She knelt, pulled them close, and kissed their foreheads. "You saved me," she murmured, holding them tight. "I thought I gave you away, but you came back." Gabriel stood nearby, umbrella in hand, unused. He watched them under the misty light, feeling something sacred settle in his chest. Later, when the guests had left and the lanterns flickered in the soft wind, the family sat together on the old bench beneath the pear tree. Lila curled in Rachel's lap. Noah rested against Gabriel's shoulder. The rain had faded to a gentle drizzle, no more than a hush across the leaves. Rachel looked up at Gabriel, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever think we were all just waiting to find each other?" Gabriel brushed a wet strand of hair from her cheek. "I think we were the light at the end of each other's storm." They sat in silence, not the kind that hurts, but the kind that heals. And as the final notes of a lullaby floated through the garden, they all knew. The darkness hadn't disappeared, but now they weren't afraid of it anymore, because they had love, and they had each other. In today's fast-paced world, where second chances often feel like luxuries, Gabriel, Rachel, Lila, and Noah remind us of something deeper, something timeless. That healing doesn't come from perfection, but from persistence. That love doesn't always arrive wrapped in certainty. It sometimes begins in broken places, and that family isn't only built by blood, but by courage, trust, and the decision to stay. Rachel's journey speaks to countless women who feel trapped in silence. Gabriel's reminds us that even the most hardened hearts can rediscover purpose when they choose compassion. And those two small children, they represent the light that keeps shining, even when the world grows dark. In a time when many families are separated, when loneliness quietly creeps into our homes, perhaps this story invites us to ask, who in our lives needs to be believed in? before they can believe in themselves. What does it truly mean to be home? And can forgiveness be the beginning, not the end? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed or lived a second chance? Do you think people can change if someone chooses to stand by them? Please share your reflections in the comments below. Let's start a conversation, because your words might just become someone else's hope. Thank you for spending time with us at Warm Soul Stories. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that even in the darkest storms, a little light and a little love can change everything.